Good evening. If we can all settle down, that would be grand. Thank you so much. I've been reading Irish literature lately, so I keep talking about things being grand. It just seems a natural statement. My name is Diane Proctor, and I'm serving as the moderator this evening for the Reclaim Our Democracy Committee, which has put all of this together. I have so many thank yous to make before we start. First, to the church for providing us with this remarkable sanctuary. To Minutemen Media Network up there, covering this whole thing and making it all possible. So big applause to Minutemen Media Network. And to Bruce locally, who's managed to make all of this communication and technology possible. And to the Reclaim Our Democracy team, headed by the inimicable Fred Van Dusen, who has faithfully led us to this evening and to tomorrow's festival, which we're all looking forward to. I was reminded to tell you that if you need a bathroom or a ladies' room, you can just go through these doors here and you'll figure out where to go. So, go down. Yes, go down. I got a good signal from it. Okay. We are all aware by now of the 2025 program, 600-page long, promulgated by the Heritage Foundation to plan for what they're going to do should Biden not win re-election. As well, we have watched courts on the highest levels we want still slow-track decisions in order to suppress the elevation of truth in what happened on January 6th. Those, however, are the obvious concerns. We all know those. We watch them daily in the newspapers. We're aware of them as we pay attention on news programs and in the reading that we do. Those are the obvious concerns. I dedicate this introduction to Heather Cox Richardson, whose research efforts provide insights into the most unexpected corners of our fight for democracy. Yesterday's column is a prime example. She wrote, "The House Speaker, Mike Johnson, elevated Ronnie Jackson." Now, who would have been paying attention to this? This is the question we have to ask ourselves. The House Speaker, Mike Johnson, elevated Ronnie Jackson, Republican from Texas, and Scott Perry, the Republican from Pennsylvania, to the House Intelligence Committee, giving them oversight of the entire U.S. intelligence community and access to the nation's most sensitive foreign intelligence. The intelligence community includes, and this is fascinating, intelligence from the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Space Force. Does that mean SpaceX, as well as what Boeing has just done? The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Department, the State Department, the Department of Energy, which oversees information about nuclear weapons, the Treasury Department, and the Department of Homeland Security. It also oversees the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and that oversight is likely a key reason Johnson put Jackson and Perry on the committee. A former Navy admiral, Jackson was Trump's first, do we all remember this, White House physician? I don't know if you all remember that little charade and that little debacle. At any rate, Trump liked him enough to try unsuccessfully to promote him into the cabinet and within the U.S. Navy, and then to back him successfully for Congress after he retired from the Navy in 2019. In 2022, the U.S. Navy demoted him from admiral to captain after a 2021 report by the Inspector General of the Defense Department, over which he now incidentally has some control, showed he had disparaged, belittled, and bullied and humiliated his staff and abused alcohol on at least 2 occasions when he was supposed to be providing medical care for government agencies, for government personnel. Now, if that's not worrisome, Perry is more problematic than even Jackson. Cassidy Hutchinson, we all know who she is, right? Do we all know who Cassidy Hutchinson is? Anybody not know? I'd be happy to, okay, right? Yes? Okay, Cassidy Hutchinson, who was a person from, was a former aide to Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and she worked very much with the House Intelligence Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. So that's who Cassidy Hutchinson is. Cassidy Hutchinson kept saying that Perry played an important role in the plan to keep Trump in office after he lost the 2020 presidential election. She told podcast host Scott Lamar in October of 2023 that Perry was central to the planning of January 6th. And she has said repeatedly that Perry asked Trump for a pardon before he left office. Now, why would you ask for a pardon? Unless you were worried that something you had done was probably not on the up and up. Federal authorities from the FBI subsequently seized Perry's cell phone in 2022 as part of their investigation into the effort to seize the presidency. He is the only member of Congress whose cell phone was seized. Like Trump, who has attacked the FBI since James Comey, Perry has complained bitterly about the FBI's investigation of him. Now, Perry will be on the committee that oversees the FBI. In a statement, he said, "I look forward to providing not only a fresh perspective, but conducting actual oversight, not blind obedience to some facets of our intel community that all too often abuse their powers, resources, and authority to spy on American people." Meanwhile, there were signs, Heather Cox Richardson continues, over the past few days of the deeply different party principles at the heart of the 2024 election. At an event to reach Black voters in what Julia Tereso and Sean Collins Walsh of the Philadelphia Inquirer described as one of the widest and most conservative parts of Philly, Representative Byron Daniels, a Black representative from Florida. Now, what is a Black representative from Florida doing speaking in a conservative portion of Philadelphia? But that's another discussion another time. Illustrated the grip of a fantasy idyllic past on MAGA Republicans. Donalds, and that's his name, Donalds praised the Jim Crow era of American history, which was literally named for vicious caricature of African Americans that helped to justify the lynching that characterized the period. Because during Jim Crow, now this is what he said, during Jim Crow, the family was together. He blamed the Great Society programs of President Johnson, and he included civil rights and civil welfare programs for eroding family values, and that the undermining of the entirety of the Black community rests with those efforts that were undertaken during that time period. It's hard to believe, but when Americans are not thoroughly but honestly educated in our own complex history, this sort of misrepresentation can emerge as truth. We have hard work ahead of us and a great deal to do. Our first speaker this evening, the man I call the Oracle of Ohio, is David Pepper, and he has proven to be a trumpeter of truth. David has graciously and remarkably agreed to speak with us on his birthday. Happy birthday, David Pepper. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear David. Happy birthday to you. Is he on? Is he on, Fred, so he can hear this? Fred, hello? Oh, he's on. Oh, good. Okay. Dave has peered into the corners of our democracy and unmasked the ways the state legislatures have worked, unchecked and collaboratively, to suppress true democracy. In his two seminal works, Laboratories of Autocracy, A Wake-Up Call from Behind the Lines, and his primer, Saving Democracy, which details how citizens can and must play a role in saving democracy in this fraught time. David guides us in our good, as John Lewis would say, in our good trouble. He explains how all levels of the pro-democracy side, from national political leaders to grassroots activists, to everyday Americans must switch to offense. And he explains how to stay on offense and win on offense. Immediately and everywhere, a possessor of 2 Yale degrees, an undergraduate degree and a law degree, we are extremely fortunate to welcome once again David Pepper to Concord. David, take it away.
You can hear me, right?
Yes, gorgeous.
Okay, great. So I look forward to questions. I won't talk for too long, but some of you may have seen this. I do a Substack, and I sent out a Substack this morning, and this picks up on all the things that you were talking about in the news that are so troubling. I never ask. I'm a very lucky person, so I never ask for birthday gifts or presents from anybody. But in my Substack today, I did. Because as I thought about it in the last couple days, and this is sort of a sobering thought, I don't know if we're going to have a democracy on my next birthday. We've got one now. It's pretty weakened in states for a lot of the reasons I write about. But as we all think about it, except for maybe the veterans who we honored at Normandy yesterday, most Americans have never had a moment like we're living through right now, where 1 year from my birthday or 1 year from today, we are literally completely in the dark as to whether or not we will have a rule of law democracy in this country. That's a scary thought. Not the happiest birthday thought in the world, but I honestly thought of that. On June 7th, 2025, who knows what we're going to have? And once I thought that, for the first time in a long time, I asked a whole lot of strangers to give me one simple birthday present, to do everything they can to make sure the answer in June 7, 2025 is that we do still have a functioning democracy, and we push back against this relentless attack on it at all levels. But I went more specific than that, because I worry, and this is sort of the theme in my books, that we are far less ineffective than we could be, because we always have, for too long at least, we have viewed the battle of democracy through a very narrow lens. And that lens turns out to be very disempowering, and this was part of what I asked people to think about as part of my birthday present I was requesting. We view it through a lens as if the only elections that matter are federal, and the only way we can save democracy is beating Donald Trump. Which means that we quickly only think of the battle of democracy as involving 5 or 6 swing states, as if none of the others matter. And so the first thing I'd suggest out of 3 I'm going to mention, as we think about what we can all do in the next year, the next 6 months, reject this, it's only about a couple states, it's only about federal elections. That is a very narrow view that makes us far less effective in really protecting democracy than we could be. Democracy is a 50-state struggle. It is all levels. It's school boards. It's state house. We have to see it that way. And it's not just swing areas. It's where extremists are running extremist agendas with no one running against them. That's where they're getting most of their damage done. And we don't even run against them. That's a front line. We kind of abandon that front line because we think it's only about a few federal races and a few swing areas. So we need to see first that we are all on the front lines in the battle for democracy, wherever we are. Number 2, we need to see that, again, it's not just the federal ones, although we have to do well there, we know that. It's all levels. There are so many positions and so many things on ballots, so state Supreme Court races, state House races, often too often uncontested, ballot initiatives. Those will all impact democracy this year and going forward. And by the way, if we actually are very energized at those levels, everywhere, not just a few swing areas, swing states, that helps lift the federal races at the top of the ticket that we're all concerned about. It's not a zero-sum game. If we're fired up to help state representative candidates in tough areas and we're showing up for them, we're helping lift people all up and down the ballot. So that's number 2. We're on the front lines. The battle is at all levels. The other side that's been attacking democracy has seen that for decades. We have not. And the third is, much of the work to protect democracy is not just partisan work. It's not just political work. Once you realize that we're in a battle for democracy itself, we're not just in a partisan battle over federal offices. The truth is there's so much that needs to be done by nonprofits and community organizations to engage communities that have been too overlooked or that have been suppressed, or young people who aren't as engaged and don't see the value of democracy because they've never really felt it in their lives. There are so many other organizations, from universities to nonprofits to homeless shelters to health clinics to rec centers, that could be lifting people into democracy all the time, and they don't. So with that as a backdrop, what I ask as sort of my birthday present is that everyone on this call and the networks you're involved with and the crowded room I'm now looking at, all of us take out our footprint of influence in this world. Everything we do, not just this group, although this is a powerful group, everything we do, and we make a list of our networks, of our organizations, where we give, where we volunteer, all of it. And we figure out how each element of our footprint could be used to lift democracy. And once you realize we're not in some narrow partisan federal struggle, you realize that so much of your footprint, more of your footprint than you've ever used, can help lift democracy. You know, if you only think of it as a federal battle for a few elections, the only thing people do is give some money or give some time late in an election. Most people don't even do that. But once you see that you're all in the front lines, it can involve nonpartisan work, it's all levels of office, then you realize that your footprint, there are many parts of it that could be put to work lifting democracy that we usually do not use. And so I'm going to share, for those who are on the Zoom here, if I can figure out how to do it, a link to, literally, if you go to my website at savedemocracy.us, or you go to this link, I literally give you a link to a footprint that you can print out and fill in. And once you fill out that footprint, it almost gives you sort of your roadmap of how to get yourself far more actively involved in democracy beyond the typical ways that people do. So it's my birthday, so I'll be a little indulgent. If everyone does this and we challenge others to do it, I think we greatly enhance the likelihood that next year on my birthday, we will still have the democracy, and we'll not just have it, we'll have strengthened it against the current threats to it. So with that, I'll stop talking. I would love to hear any questions and answer them. Thank you all very much, and again, I appreciate the nice birthday wishes at the outset.
You have some questions for David. Please put them in the chat.
This is microphones, right?
Yeah.
Now it's working. Okay, who has some questions for David that they would like to ask? Let's pass them around. Oh, come on, there must be questions for this remarkable fellow. Start.
Hi, David. How do we get the media to stop saying things, phrasing things like January 6th was a bid to overturn the election instead of a plot to overturn the election? And repeating all of the propaganda and lies because it's news, thereby reinforcing it.
Yeah, that's a good question, a frustrating topic. I worry right now it's going to be difficult. I mean, the thing I would say is to the extent we're all consumers of media and they respond to consumers, support and watch and click on the media that you think is doing it well. But what I would say also, back to my footprint analogy, be the messenger that you wish they were. Whether it's you writing letters to the editor, in some communities those really matter, or your Facebook posts, or anything you do to communicate. We all in this digital age can be powerful messengers. That's so, look at what Russia does from a building in St. Petersburg. They get the message out over all the social media networks. Well, we can do the same thing with a pro-democracy message. And that's, half of what I do, frankly, is that. And I think it ends up mattering. So what I would say is, if they're media doing the right way, celebrate them, subscribe. Don't do a paywall, pay for it so they stay. But also think of the ways that you communicate in your networks, that you can get the message right, because right now we're all sort of communication warriors in this battle, and we need to take full advantage of that. The other side, that's half of what they do. It's half of what they do. It's not just their talk radio or Fox News. It's them putting it out through all sorts of other ways. We have to match them, at least in that way.
So, David, I was in a taxi cab the other day, and there was a young black man who was driving the cab, and I said, "So, tell me," I said, "Are you interested in politics, and what do you think about this upcoming election?" And we got into a wonderfully vigorous discussion. One more person who said, "Oh, I think I'll vote for Biden." Yay!
That's great. So one thing I would say about that messaging, and this kind of goes back to the first question too, I think one of the best ways to and I think this is true of your group in particular, because my guess is you're reaching out to a lot of people who aren't just one party or partisan in nature necessarily, is I think that kind of conversation, let's say you do engage and you use that moment to be a messaging warrior. One of the things I think is really important when I'm talking about, this is, by the way, this is true for the presidential, it's true for state house, it's true in between, that I think reframing much of the debate, that it's not some debate between Trump and Biden. That in a way that sort of minimizes what's at stake. And I'm going to share a Substack I did on this with those who are online. I think the frame, when you look at, you mentioned it, Project 2025, Trump's promises of retribution, Trump's promise to not fund schools with federal money that have vaccine mandates. I think we should reframe the whole thing when we talk to anybody, which is, hey, you may or may not be a Democrat, you may or may not like Joe Biden, but make no mistake, this is a campaign of Trump versus you and your freedom. And if he wins, which of your many freedoms that he's going after are you prepared to lose? And you put it in those terms with someone driving you in a cab or an Uber or someone you meet, and you start listing what those freedoms are. Again, healthy kids in the school if you're a mom or dad like I am, versus unvaccinated kids running around. No reproductive freedom, no IVF. You start, a DOJ that's politically attacking, but based on partisanship. You put that, you frame it as Trump against your freedom. And Biden is a vehicle to protect your freedom, but you don't have to love Biden. You don't have to think much of him. But once people think of it and that this is an attack on their freedom, and that's what this election is about, I think you're in a much more powerful place in having those kind of conversations. But good for you for having them. I just put a Substack up where I talked about it that way. I think we should all think about, in our own way, that when we talk to people, what are the freedoms that are at risk? And ask people that if they seem to be not clear yet on what may happen if the election goes the wrong way.
That's gorgeous. We have some questions. We have one first over here.
I see the one here. Do you want me to just take the one on that was asked here? So,
Online?
Lori Gil Pizarris.
How many people do we have online?
Can you hear me?
about
Can you hear me
30.
again?
30?
That
people
question,
online.
the first book I wrote to the question, so Lori Gil Pizarris, for those who can't see it, asks, conservatives have seemingly always had roadmaps for how to achieve their objective, such as electing ultra-conservatives to the Supreme Court. Do Dems have similar roadmaps? The reason I wrote my first book is because we clearly have not had nearly the long game roadmap that they have. And my first book is called Laboratories of Autocracy, because I believe the true long game roadmap for them has been to use, and this is why I said we're all on the front lines and it's not just federal. They have basically, their long-term roadmap was to use gerrymandered state houses that are unaccountable, often uncontested. That's where they advance almost their entire agenda. Not in Washington, where almost nothing ever happens. Just look at the place. It's in state houses where all this happens. That has been their roadmap. The Supreme Court's value in many ways is it is upholding the legislation that is passing in all these states that we all see happening every week. So think of their state houses are the sword of their attack, And courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, are the shield protecting that attack. And so, Lori, my entire call to action is our roadmap has to look more like theirs, where we are battling for democracy, not just over 5 Senate races every 2 years, not just the presidency. Those are necessary but not sufficient. Sufficient is getting democracy back in states where it's basically gone. And that means undoing gerrymandering wherever possible, running all over these states, meaning in district after district, do not allow half these people to go uncontested, and a lot of other steps I put in there. But that has to be our roadmap, and we have to shift our mindset. That is starting to happen. But that's why 2024, we beat Trump in 20. That didn't save democracy, did it? We have to, if we're going to really save democracy, our roadmap has to be deeper and broader than what it's been.
Terrific.
So David, who has to carry out the roadmap? What is it going to take?
I honestly think
Together.
it needs to be thought of, and it is more. I think the DNC is doing this, but this is, by the way, this is multipartisan. This is not just one party.
Yes,
this has to be multipartisan, which makes it more difficult for one entity to carry it out. But I think longer term, I think presidents and presidential candidates, they have to think this way. They have to not make it only about federal. I think U.S. Senate and House leaders need to think about it this way. They need to stop thinking that the only races that matter are theirs. They need to see that even when they win, if we have dozens of states where half the people are uncontested, and that's where the extremism passes, we have to start changing that. And then I think that has to be beyond just one party. So, one of the advantages conservatives have is, in the end, they're smaller, they're much more top-down, they're more organized, and big money drives a lot of it. So that big money is able to get everyone on the same page. Ours is harder. But one of the good things, again, I'm an optimist, or I wouldn't be doing all this. I do think, and I write about this in my second book, there is a growing grassroots-based infrastructure that is starting to do this. And it's why we have a winning streak for democracy going back to Kansas of August of 22. Every election denying Secretary of State candidate lost in November of 22. We saved Ohio's democracy in August of 23. We flipped the Wisconsin Supreme Court to end gerrymandering in Wisconsin. So there's a momentum building. It's not a top-down momentum. It's a grassroots-built momentum. And my hope is we keep building it. We don't just get distracted to think it's only about the presidential. And my hope is that same grassroots momentum starts demanding of leaders that they see what the rest of us are seeing, which is we have to have a broader strategy than we've had. And I think some of those leaders, Jamie Harris of DNC, he sees this. I know him well, but I also see how he's acting on it.
Now, we only have about 7 minutes left, but we've got questions here in the sanctuary.
Dave,
Sir.
I had a question.
Okay.
I had a question about the political map that we see on the news every night, where they say, the red states and the blue states. And what I was wondering was what your thinking was on why it is the media isn't really going into the red states, or what the amount of coverage is, and why the people in those states feel the way they do. And I think, from what the little I've known, that a lot of that has to do with economics and opportunity. I know Biden has done a lot with the infrastructure bill to try and get that going in those areas. But I'm just interested in those two thoughts, whether you feel like it's an economic issue, that people are turning to Trump and MAGA because they feel so frustrated that they figure they'll just drag the house down if they're not going to share in the house. Or also...
On the media, you all see what I see. They literally follow Mike Johnson or Kevin McCarthy. You ever watch this on these national cable? There'll be 60 reporters chasing them down the hallway. I'm like, hey, media, why don't you have 20 reporters chase those guys down the hallway? You're all getting the same story. It's not like anyone's getting a scoop in those chase scenes. Send the other 40 out to states and cover what's happening here. There's an absolute desert of media coverage of states. If your goal in life is to undermine democracy, that's a huge opportunity. You can pass ridiculous and extreme bills in states and hardly get any coverage about it. And many of these are deeply unpopular, but no one even knows they're happening. So I do think, I wish, and some are doing it. Judy Woodruff, for example, has been going around the country doing what you're talking about. She did a story in Steubenville that I helped with. So some are doing it, but for the most part, they're so focused, and in presidential years, it's especially problematic. They're so focused on chasing down on the latest bill or court case of a federal issue that they're leaving dozens of these states essentially uncovered. And that's a problem, and that's an invitation to the people who want to push their agenda in places where no one covers it. It makes state houses perfect. I think it's more complicated than just economics. That's clearly some of it, but I think there's a lot going on here. I mean, one, let's be clear. These states, many of them, are not really functioning democracies at this point. I mean, there's almost no accountability left in the politics of these state houses. And what that has done is it's created a downward spiral. If only one side is there and they cannot be held accountable. I go through this in great detail, I don't have time to do it here, but if only one side is in power, they know they can't be held accountable. They know the only risk to their career is a primary where someone is more extreme than they are. Then you have a downward spiral of extremism that doesn't even reflect the people of that state. It's sort of a momentum that builds from these perverse incentives of power with no accountability. And that's why you see states that voted for Obama in 2008, Iowa, North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, unrecognizable. Indiana, for goodness sakes, unrecognizable today. I don't think it's that all the people suddenly shifted completely. I think it's that democracy in these states are so broken that all the incentives reward being extremist. That's how you stay in power. And that is shifting the politics of how you get ahead, shifting the politics of policy, what that state house does. And if we're not in that state making the counter argument, I do think over time that also infects the people's views, because all they see is one side, and that side is literally in a competition with one another over who's the most extreme. That can happen separate of economics. It can happen because the institutional incentives that are coming out of extreme gerrymandering, no one running in half these districts. Once you think about what that incentive system is, you're rewarded for doing exactly what they're doing. So I think, and by the way, we also sadly have a history in our country of always having a fierce backlash whenever a diverse majority starts to get its way. And that clearly is something that's happened since Obama won. That's how we got Jim Crow after Reconstruction. It's the same pattern. And what I would say about that is it's not just that Obama beat John McCain. McCain, for reasons that some admire him, was not a huge fan favorite of Republicans. The reason they changed rules when they had a chance wasn't just because Obama was in the White House. It's because the Obama coalition was so powerful in states like Ohio, it knocked them out of the state house here. It knocked them out of the state house in many states. That diverse coalition was such a threat, and it is diverse, and it's anchored in African-American votes, young people as well, that, like we've seen throughout American history, that unleashes an ugly backlash, and that's another element, I think, in what's happening in some of these states that is beyond economics. So it's a combination of things, and it's kind of been institutionalized. Until we see that and challenge it, we can continue to win federal elections that we prioritize, but nothing else I've just described will change, even if we win those. So we have to go to where this is happening and fight back at that level. Very, very good question, though.
Yes.
Do you want me to answer this other one from Susan?
Hi, David. Thank you for speaking with us. Yeah, I agree with you. It can't just all be about federal elections, but as we are in a presidential run-up, and I know it's early days, and as we know from 2016, polls cannot be relied upon, but it's a two-part question. First part, if closer to November, it started to look like, even in a two-person race, there was no way in the world that Biden would prevail over Trump, but it did look like Bobby Kennedy Jr. could succeed in beating Trump. Would you be in favor of Biden stepping down? And then the second part of the question is, do you believe that, have you listened to Robert Kennedy Jr.? Do you think he's a patriot who loves democracy and would stand up for the Constitution? Thank you.
Question, I do a lot of these. I've never been asked these two in a row before. I can't say I've studied everything he's ever said, but a whole lot of what Mr. Kennedy has said disturbs me or worries me. So I don't want to comment on his patriotism, but he seems to have some instincts and some views that I think would be quite dangerous for our country. I wouldn't support Biden stepping aside, and I don't think the hypothetical is going to happen. But I also think that what we have right now is a situation that, for a variety of reasons, the people of America are not falling over themselves for any candidate. I mean, Trump's numbers are always somewhere, not the head-to-head against Biden, but do you like Donald Trump? He's always somewhere in the 30s. He has a ceiling. Clearly, Biden has some work to do. Some of it's tied to age, I guess, and some of it's tied to the fact that people don't sense the progress that I think is happening, but they don't feel it yet, or they don't see him doing it yet. Others is just straight up disinformation and a polarized electorate. So I think that battle is clearly close. If there's a poll with Biden behind, I don't dismiss that. I think that's a reminder that Trump could win. That's why I said I don't know the state of things in June of 2025, and that should scare all of us. But I also think, just like we saw in 2020, I think the fear of Trump in the end, and the fear of what he would do to democracy and freedoms, if properly communicated, this gets to Susan's question, I think in the end that could actually cost him the election. I think, frankly, if another candidate had emerged from that primary, they would probably be in a better position to win than Trump is. Because I think in the end, the things he's saying, even compared to 16, I think he was a better candidate with a better message in 16. That sounds strange to say. His entire campaign now is retribution. It's about a big lie. It's about attacking freedoms. He's taking credit for the Dobbs decision. It's bizarre. It's not what you would almost ever. In 16, he at least was saying, hey, I think, back to the earlier question, I think small towns have struggled. I'm going to help them. That's not what this campaign's about. This is a much darker and backward-looking campaign. So I think in the end, it's there for the taking, because it's quite bizarre when you really assess it as a candidacy. But I do think, obviously, there's a lot of work to do between now and then for Biden to win. And I think in the end, my guess is that Kennedy is probably taking votes from either side at this point. I mean, his views on vaccinations and all that, I think probably take as many votes away from Donald Trump, who was the guy. Let's give Trump credit. There are a lot of things that I don't think he did well as president. He did surge vaccines. Now, he doesn't want to act like he did, but he's the one who actually took credit for those vaccines. So that's the kind of vote that Bobby Kennedy may get from Trump, the anti-vax vote. But I think the threat to freedom and democracy, and this goes to Susan's question on the chat here, I think the communication about freedoms needs to be very specific. It can't just be general talk of democracy, general talk of freedom. You'll lose most people with that. I think the reason Dobbs elicited such a powerful response among voters in the coming elections, including, I think, this one, it will continue to do so, is because it was such a real example of what losing freedom feels like to young people, to women, to families. And they've never been able to put it back in the bottle, because this wasn't some academic argument about freedom. It was a real, tangible, painful. We had a 10-year-old rape victim in Ohio forced to go to Indiana. We've had that case out of Texas. I think the more clearly you communicate what loss of freedom means in individual lives, I think the more powerful the message will be, even with people who may be conservative, but will not agree, for example, with how that 10-year-old victim was treated in Ohio.
David, we're so grateful for your time, and we could obviously spend several hours talking to you. Most of all, go hug your boys. Have a wonderful birthday. I hope you're having a birthday party
We are, right?
with your kids.
This is
Okay,
part of it.
thank
This
you.
is the intro to the part of it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all
Thank
you're
you
doing.
so much.
And please fill out your footprint and put it to work between now and November.
Thank you so much.
Take care. See ya.
What a remarkable fellow. I mean, we could listen to him for hours. Judge Nancy Gertner is our next speaker, and she's a graduate of Barnard College and Yale Law School, where she was the editor of the Yale Law Review Journal. I wonder if she and David, he left, actually knew each other when they were there. She has been an instructor at Yale Law School and at Harvard Law School. She was appointed to the bench in 1994 by President Clinton. In 2008, she received the Thurgood Marshall Award from the American Bar Association section for individual rights and responsibilities, only the second woman to receive it, and the other one, of course, was Justice Ginsburg. A recipient of numerous awards for her work on the bench, she has written and spoken widely on various legal issues and has appeared as a keynote speaker, panelist, and lecturer concerning civil rights, civil liberties, employment, criminal justice, and procedural issues throughout the U.S., Europe, and Asia. Her acumen proves, for someone like me, humbling. I hope we can enjoy it. She's going to be talking about a section. She spoke to the League of Women Voters at a breakfast meeting in January, and we're only going to see a small part of it, but it's a section when she talked about the complexity of the Supreme Court and how she feels that issue ought to be addressed. You can view it, it's her interview in its entirety on the League website or in Minuteman Media Network, MMN YouTube. Thank you. So here is Nancy Gertner.
I have to begin with what my husband, he denies saying this, but I have said it now, but I believe he said it as soon as I left the bench. One of the problems with being a judge is that the only way you can speak is through your opinions. You can't, I did some op-eds, but you have to be careful about how you speak. And now John says that now that I can speak, I can't shut up. That's one thing that he says to me. The other thing is he says to me that I've never met a microphone that I didn't like. And this is all true. This is all true. And so being a judge was very constraining because, you just couldn't go off. Some judges do, but I wasn't in that category. I wanted to, this is a very difficult topic to wrap your head around. And so I brought all of my notes, only some of which I will ever look at again. I want to start at the top, which is the Supreme Court and what's going on with the Supreme Court. And then I want to talk about what's going on in the lower courts, with respect to the Trump cases, give people some sense of what's going on. And then I want to broaden my focus to the question of whether courts can be the first line of defense in a democracy. So let me start with, this is the report of the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court. I was on that commission. It did its work in 2021. To a degree, before the full scope of what we are dealing with became clear. It was a commission that Biden put together for the purpose of just airing the issues. Now that I can actually spin this in two directions. On the one hand, some will say he put it together in order to stop the discussion about the Supreme Court in the campaign. He was putting this to silence that. But on the other hand, it also was the idea of having a deep discussion about the Supreme Court out of the political sphere. And in fact, the commission was extraordinarily even-handed. There were originalists, there were people who were very conservative, there were people who didn't believe the Supreme Court should change at all, and then there was me. Larry Tribe, Sherilyn Ifill of the NAACP Inc. Fund, and a few others like that. But it was very balanced. Its purpose was not to come up with any recommendations, actually. We were only supposed to sort of flesh out what the issues were. So what were those issues? And this is part of the dilemma that we're facing. We have, in my view, this is an editorial comment, the most powerful court in the world, with a court of complete impunity for various reasons, and now one of the most conservative courts in our history. But the court that we were talking about, this is a court that is smaller than other Supreme Courts. 9 is actually a small number, that has lifetime appointments. Every other Supreme Court, High Court, has term limits. And lifetime, when the court was fashioned, you didn't believe that you actually needed to come up with term limits because people didn't live so long. That's not the case today. So there's never been a court with no limit at all on the amount of time someone can serve. There's no court that has the power of our Supreme Court. That is to say, many Supreme Courts, high courts, can be overturned. Portions of what they say can be overturned by the legislature. The legislature has the final word, or the parliament has the final word. So this is a court that has the last word on the Constitution. And it's also a court that can pick its own cases. It's not obliged. There's some areas where they're obliged to take cases, but most areas they actually can pick their own cases. The combination of no term limits, small court, pick their own cases, no appeal from them, has never been a recipe for disaster until today. And why is that? Well, so the Presidential Commission looked at the ethics of the court, looked at the way they select their cases, looked at transparency, looked at term limits, and looked at the size of the court. On all of those measures, essentially, the commission said, there's nothing we can do. And there's nothing we can do, either because change required a constitutional change or because the feeling was that once you engaged in a discussion about the court, it would open up even more political battles. My part of this was on the size of the court. That was the subcommittee that I was on. And I actually had no opinions, which is remarkable for me, as many of us know. I had no opinion when we started. You know, that doesn't usually happen. Another wonderful quote from my father, who said that some people had hardening of the arteries. I had hardening of the opinions. You know, but I was on the committee that was dealing with size. And the size was the only issue that many of us were dealing with that did not require a constitutional amendment. Term limits, although some people have different views of it, do require constitutional amendment because the Constitution talks about appointed for life. There are ways of getting around that, which we could talk about, but that's a constraining issue. Changing the jurisdiction of the court, one could do, but the feeling was that in this political debate, who knows where that would go. But size seemed to be something that we could do that wouldn't require a constitutional change. And why is the size of the court important? As I said, it's the smallest court in the world. Every other high court has more than 9 members. 9 is not a magical number. The court had been at 6. The court has been at 10 at one point. 9 is not a magical number. Congress could change the size of the court tomorrow. Congress could come up with a way of sort of staircasing the changes in the court. So it could be 2 years under two appointees under one president, and then 2 under another president, and 2 under whoever's after that. Yes, it could lead to sort of a nuclear war of size, so that, Democrats would increase by 2 and Republicans will suddenly increase, by 2 more. And by the next millennium, we could have this, court the size of the League of Women Voters. But the feeling was, and because of the notion that there could be a quid pro quo and a back and forth, that this is not something that we should engage in at all. The first draft of the section on size said we could expand the court, we should expand the court, but don't do it because of the politics. And Professor Tribe and I, Sherilyn Eiffel, Andrew Crespo at Harvard, a number of us said we couldn't sign on to a report that said this is a deeply flawed institution, nothing we can do about it. And why then did we say we should expand the size of the court? Well, there were three reasons. One is that in fact, and because everyone harked on the notion that this would be Democrat court packing, as the Republicans had done, court packing. So the answer to that was the court has been packed. The court has been packed, not illegally, but by violating norms. You remember the story. Scalia dies during Obama's term. Obama proposes Merrick Garland. Senator McConnell will not give Merrick Garland a hearing. Not a hearing. As a result of that, the position remains open until Trump is elected and Justice Gorsuch is put in that position. So it was a manipulation. The Constitution doesn't say one way or the other, though. I mean, what McConnell did was not illegal. It was just violated the norms of practice, as we've seen happening more and more. And so the first person that goes on the court is Gorsuch. Then Justice Kennedy decides to retire, clearly intending to give Trump a position. In fact, there are some discussions that, Kavanaugh, he had Kavanaugh in mind, and there were, I don't know whether any of this is true, and there were assurances that Kavanaugh would get that position. So Gorsuch, then Kavanaugh. Then Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was my mentor, dies. There's a whole other discussion about whether she should have stayed on as long as she did, but she dies. She dies, I believe it was in late September, and within a month, Amy Coney Barrett is selected and confirmed. The concern about that had blocked Merrick Garland, McConnell had said Merrick Garland shouldn't get on the court because we shouldn't have a hearing because it's too close to the election. Amy Coney Barrett gets on the court while people are voting, early voting. So the notion that the Democrats would be packing the court now, it seems to me, is an empty statement. The court was packed. 3 extraordinarily conservative jurists, which I'll talk about in a moment, all under the Trump administration. So that was reason number 1. It has been packed. And to some degree, a proposal of 2 and 2 and 2 is an unpacking. The other reason, and to some degree this is part of the testimony of Professor Klarman at Harvard, which I found incredibly compelling, the Republicans are in all sorts of ways restricting the ability of the Democrats to win elections in the various states around the country, giving power to state legislators that they never had, grotesquely restricting the Voting Rights Act so that southern states can do with respect to voting what they had been barred from doing under the Voting Rights Act, manipulating, gerrymandering, et cetera. So the configuration of state legislatures, of state voting patterns, means that makes it easier for Republicans to win in years to come. So the court is packed, and where ordinarily one would anticipate a certain amount of change as the administrations change, you add to that the concerns about manipulation of voting, and there will not be change. There's no question the court changes, not as fast as the electorate does. There's a certain ebb and flow of the court, but that's not going to happen for the foreseeable future because of the age of the justices that are on the court, A, and B, because of the ways in which elections have been manipulated in this country. And, and then the third reason is that these are young, relatively young individuals who are very different and were selected in a very different way than previous justices had been selected. And I can't begin to describe, that's actually my afternoon talk about the way they've been selected. You've all read about this. These were not, the Supreme Court, no matter how much people today talk about the liberal Supreme Court, the Supreme Court was essentially moderate right to moderate left. And while it swung, it never swung much wider than that. When the abortion decision came down, but then followed was nearly 15 years of restrictions of abortions. When there was the criminal law revolution and the right to counsel, the concern about forced confessions, there were then, 15 to 20 years of restrictions of that. So this has never been a court that was wildly liberal or wildly conservative until now. This court was selected by the Federalist Society, selected, Trump was quite open about outsourcing the selection process to Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society. All of them were on the Federalist Society. You can say, this is fine for you to say, Gertner, you're this big liberal, right? I mean, I was an ACLU member. My husband was the legal director of the ACLU. So it's time for the other side. Well, that's not completely true. The Supreme Court justices, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was actually a moderate, had been a moderate on the District of Columbia Circuit. Justice Souter was appointed by a Republican, was a moderate. Most of the justices, even Thurgood Marshall, was cautious on the Supreme Court. There's not the same kind of orthodoxy on the, quote, left as there is with respect to this group on the right. And what do I mean by that? Scalia was an originalist. But as he famously said, he was an originalist but not crazy. And what that meant was he believed that the original intent of the Constitution would restrict what judges did, rather than the counter argument was a living Constitution that would enable the Constitution to grow. I feel like answering any phone. I'm totally tied to my phone, and I feel like going and picking it up and answering it. Although you have to do what I do, which is I have a different ringtone for each of my kids, so I know what to answer and what not to answer. So this group, I want to suggest then again that this group is very different than other appointees, not just that they are young and not just the way they were appointed, but they are really very different. And I wanted to talk just briefly and get into the weeds about, as I said, originalism, which sounds like a way of restricting judicial interpretation, so that you're bound by the meaning of the Constitution or the intent of the words when they were enacted. You can't go off on some new interpretation. So but this is a different kind of originalism. The originalism that Alito talked about was essentially an originalism that said, if you're going to create new rights, I'm not going to be with you. If you're going to create new rights, we're going to look only at what the Constitution had in mind way back when it was promulgated. The problem with that is that the new originalism also doesn't believe in precedent. The combination of an originalist point of view and not believing in precedent means not just that we're talking about new interpretations, which you'll reject if they are not consistent with the Constitution, but they are willy-nilly, heading straight into undoing established interpretations of the Constitution in areas that you all know about, but in fact are more broad than that. Not just gun rights, not just abortion, labor law issues, administrative issues, environment issues. So it's not just, one could understand originalism. You have to look at what the Constitution was intended, what the words mean and what the intent was. You have to obviously begin there, otherwise this document doesn't constrain power. But what they're saying is, this new court has a right to undo the older interpretations. And that's chaos. That is absolute chaos. I should say the Bruin decision, which was the case with respect to gun rights, is chilling, I say, as a federal judge who presided over gun cases in my courtroom all the time. It's chilling because aside from the fundamental issues with the interpretation of it, but it's really going to cast a pall on regulations today with respect to guns that didn't exist at the time of the Constitution. It's appalling with respect to women. There are very creative Harvard law professors who said, okay, we're all originalists. I'm going to now look at the original interpretation of this or that, and we'll make use of it for the issues that we think are important. And the only problem with that is that women are not in that calculus. Women are not in that calculus. At the time the Constitution was drafted, women were property. Blacks were property as well, but the 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendment did address that. But women were property and didn't begin to get rights until the 20th century with the 19th Amendment and the vote. So originalism is the obverse of everything that Ruth Bader Ginsburg did in her life. And originalism threatens to undo all that we care about. The abortion decision was classic in this regard, and the chaos that it has unleashed is something you all know about. So I go back to my first issue. This is a court that was packed. This is a court that was packed combined with political changes in the legislature, state legislatures, is going to mean that this group of people will be on the court for the foreseeable future. My lifetime, surely the lifetimes of our kids, 30 years. It would be one thing again if they were if they were Alito originalists, but they are not. They are hell-bent to undo really decades of law. I actually, just as a footnote, I actually find it hard to teach these days, and I don't know whether, John, you have the same problem. I mean, you tell the students that there's a stable body of law that you can interpret and can, expand incrementally. How can you talk about a stable body of law, and how can you talk about incremental when in, 3 years, the numbers of precedents that have been overturned is really shocking. So,
Thank you, Judge Gertner. We can't have a question and answer, obviously. But, so her explication of originalism and her explication of the chaos in the Supreme Court gives us another perspective on what we need to do and how we need to act. David moves us from the state legislatures. She moves us to the Supreme Court. And our next speaker is Whitney Taylor, who's the political director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. Whitney joined the ACLU of Massachusetts in 2010 to help develop the statewide presence of ACLU supporters and activists to advocate on behalf of civil liberties. As a national expert on illicit drug policy, the criminal justice and public health systems, and the electoral ballot initiative and legislative processes, she coordinates the development and implementation of the ACLU in Massachusetts public advocacy agenda. Whitney received a BA in criminal justice and an MS in public policy from American University in Washington, D.C., in the heart of everything we're dealing with. She will provide us with a sense for what the ACLU is doing to protect our democracy. Welcome, Whitney.
Hi, everybody. My name is Whitney Taylor. I'm the political director at the ACLU. This is a hard act to follow. Nancy Gertner, right? I was lucky enough when I started at the ACLU, her husband, John, was still the legal director, and she was not able yet to be on our board because she was still sitting on the court. And it's really great to have her out in the advocacy world right now. I am going to take a pivot. We are not going to talk about the presidential election. We're going to talk about us. What are we doing? We're here in the Commonwealth. We're in Massachusetts. We're very liberal, aren't we? We're very blue. We're safe. No. But we have a plan to fix this. And one of the things that I love that David talks about is all politics are local. And what we have seen over decades was a position of folks that did not believe in everybody's rights and civil liberties. I should also say right now, the ACLU is a nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse. And a little side note, this whole reality that we've taught generations of people that there's only two parties and they have to be Democrats and Republicans is ridiculous. But that's for even bigger work. But here in Massachusetts, what can we do? I first want to start off with kind of just a little bit of a comment about how liberal people think in the rest of the world we are here in Massachusetts. I worked all over the country in state legislatures doing ballot questions, and many places are very different, but everybody's like, oh my God, Massachusetts is so liberal. And I was like, oh good, I've spent some time in Utah and Wisconsin, now I'm gonna go back and do great things in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is not very liberal. Massachusetts, one, has an amazing state constitution. One of the first things that people talk to me about is like, well, you were the first to get gay marriage. I'm like, no. We were the first to defeat a constitutional amendment to try and end gay marriage. Actually, John Adams covered us with gay marriage if we all just kind of moved forward with our constitution. And what we did beat back here was changing our state constitution in order to disallow gay marriage. People say, oh my God, everybody there is Democratic. It's gotta be this beautiful place. Well, you know what? I spend a lot of time in the State House and whatever, and there are so many people in the State House here in Massachusetts with a D behind their name that would be an R anywhere else. Right? But they know to win here in Massachusetts, everybody puts a D behind their name. And that's why we have to start thinking not only about primary elections and really talking to folks that are Democrats and really getting their ideas and working with groups of people to be like, you know what, maybe we should run another Democrat and actually make this a primary race, right? But, primary races are hard. On average in Massachusetts, only about 47% of people show out for primary elections. I did a little research here about Concord. You guys are great in presidentials. You guys got an 87, 89% voter turnout rate for the last two presidential elections. Well done, that's awesome. However, your last Board of Selectmen race that just happened, so the people that are really gonna control your lives, 14% turnout in Concord. It's probably most of you here in this room. So, there's always some work, and I really did want to just, underscore what David was saying. What we need to do is to not, in our state, in Massachusetts, is look at our local races, look at our school boards, look at selectmen, city councils, mayors. We have this thing called the Governor's Council. These are the people who decide who our judges are, how pardons work, how many other things, how the courts run, and those races are always with no challengers. They have to meet like once a month. They get paid $30K a year for one meeting a month. And yet they have a huge amount of influence on our courts, on who can be, put up, what's the word? Sorry, everybody, it's past 8 o'clock. I should be in bed. Nominated. Who's nominated and then who gets through the process. So, we have some work to do here in Massachusetts. And what the ACLU of Massachusetts has done is really decided to build out our work with wonderful partners like Common Cause. I'm so glad that they're here today and Virginia's coming. And we have Jeff and Dev here who are your local Common Cause here. Get to know them, love them. I do, they're awesome. And making Massachusetts the beacon we actually purport to be. So, I could talk about all of this stuff forever, but I wanted to talk just a couple of things that we are looking at the ACLU and in partnerships. So, yes, for this upcoming election, we are a proud member of the Election Protection Coalition. And I want everybody to, I'm going to say this, protectthevote.net. protectthevote.net. What this is to actually have and sign up people, and we train them with our great partners at Common Cause, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, Mass Voter Table, League of Women Voters. What we do in a nonpartisan, non-endorsing way is make sure that all of our polls and our elections run correctly. And guess what? They don't. I personally was involved with election protection. I love doing it. I'm there at 6 a.m. with my cup of coffee, which is why I'm ready for bed now. But there to watch the polls and make sure everybody has their right to cast their vote. Well, I was out in Springfield, which is one of our very problem areas in Massachusetts as far as voting rights go. And in fact, I was there, I think it was 6 years ago now, election morning, ran around, everything started, everything was going great. So then I start doing my swoop around other polls at noon. 2 polls are closed for lunch on election day in Springfield, Massachusetts. So, what do? Thank God we have this partnership. I luckily had the city clerk's number on my phone because, we go out there and we advocate, we make friends. And I called up and I go, hey, guess what? 2 polls are closed during lunch. This is not good. Immediately got the state involved, we got involved, the coalition was involved, and we were actually able to get a reverse 911 call sent out to every resident of Springfield and kept the polls open an extra hour and a half. Now, of course, we lost a bunch of people who went during their lunch hour to vote, but that's just to say this voter protection is very, very important. I mean, that's a big example, but there's still so many polling places where people who have disabilities don't have access, where sometimes we have a lot of issues right now with people getting pushed off the voter rolls because of mistakes with census responses. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here in Massachusetts just to protect election and democracy here. We also work with Common Cause on several pieces of legislation that is going right now. It was great that we got mail-in voting done, especially right before the pandemic. But we still are a place that doesn't have same-day voter registration. We're still a place where they say cleaning the voter rolls is very difficult, and we don't have enough manpower to do it. That was actually what Secretary Galvin just said when we were trying to pass a piece of legislation on cleaning the voter rolls. So there's legislation and work we can do here, but also how can we actually get better? And so along with the election protection work and changing legislation to make voting more accessible in the Commonwealth, we also have launched a campaign called BIPOC to the Ballot. One of the things, and it was very interesting, and some of my colleagues said this to me, once we passed, and if folks don't know, we have motor voter is what it's called here. When you go get your driver's license, you can register to vote and kind of get in there. And everybody's like, that's fixed it. We've fixed low voter registration. And we're like, yeah, no. That's a whole bunch of assumptions there. One, you're assuming people get driver's licenses. Many, many, many people in urban areas do not get driver's licenses. And guess who those people are mostly? People of color. So, that was an assumption. And we also, we live in a very, frankly, white state, and that's still, so it's very easy for people who might be of another color or another culture to feel disenfranchised very quickly. So we created BIPOC to the Ballot, and what we did was we started off in 3 cities who are either currently a minority-majority city or on their way. So Brockton is currently a minority-majority city and actually a full minority black city. Springfield is minority-majority if you put all BIPOC people together, as well as Pittsfield. And what we started doing was focusing on municipal elections. Because when you talk about the big presidential, that gets all of us who are addicted to CNN, well, you can see my age, CNN, I guess, whatever people read on their phones. I still don't do that, but it's too much. But, for all of us that are very, involved in paying attention, to the election, what happens is people are like, that turns a whole bunch of people off. I have no influence, I live in Massachusetts, why does it matter? Why should I vote? So what we actually do with BIPOC to the Ballot is we had our first go round the municipal elections in 2023. And we actually went and we got canvassers, and we paid canvassers from the community. So it was neighbors knocking on neighbors' doors, and we have voter rolls. We're really sophisticated now at the ACLU. We had voter rolls, and we could go back and go, listen, you're registered to vote, but we noticed you haven't voted for the last 5 elections. What's going on? Just talk to us. And we would have conversations at the door and learn about that. And then we'd be like, well, what do you want from your municipality? And we would learn about that. And then we built for each city a candidate questionnaire. We talk to your constituents. We know what they want. Answer this questionnaire. And then we went back out, knocked on the same doors, and said, hey, remember us? We talked to you. We listened to you. We did this questionnaire. This is what the candidates said about the issues you cared about. Once again, we're non-electioneering, non-endorsing. We were just giving them the information that they had shared was important to us. We then a third time went back, either knocking on the door or a phone call to help create a voter plan. Do you have a ride to the polls? Can you get there? Once again, working in community with local organizations. In 2023, we had in the Springfield primary, we had a 124% increase in the number of people that voted in Springfield. In Pittsfield, during the general election, and everybody almost doubled the voter turnout. In Pittsfield, we actually had a very contentious race for school board, was won by 3 votes. And the person that won was actually a woman of color whose family was actually in the school system and wanted to be there. So what I want to say to you all is, you know, I get it, like looking at and this is why when we have the questions about media, of course everybody is doing this Trump-Biden theme. It's a circus. It's like popcorn watching TV, right? So what we need to do, and I love Dave's answer, like, you know, if you see something or a narrative that you don't like, write a letter to the editor. If you don't know how to write a letter to the editor, go to aclum.org. We have an advocates academy. We do trainings on 101 lobbying, writing letters to the editor, writing op-eds, how to organize in your community, how to recognize what your local government looks like. So these are all the things that we are building. And for this 2024 election, as I said, what we're doing is we're continuing to work with local groups to get people out to vote, but we're not putting the same amount of effort into it because, you know, we have everybody kind of doing lots of work on the presidential. But then we will be coming back in 2025, going back to Springfield, Pittsfield, Brockton, and we are now adding Worcester and Lawrence. And what we will be doing is continuing to build. And what I want to ask you all to do, fill out your footprint, as David talked about it. But, you know, think about, you know, what you want your community here to look like in Concord. And really start paying attention. Start paying attention. Maybe, you know, work on, you know, why did only 14% of people come out to vote? I don't know who your candidates were. Maybe it was like, oh, it's the same old people. Well, you know, maybe that's something to shake up. I don't know, you know, and I'm not going to comment, non-endorsing, non-electioneering. I'm just saying 14% of people voted. And so, but there's all this work that you can do, and there's a lot of work we need to do here in Massachusetts. We were privileged to be part of a congressional hearing that Senator Warren and Senator Markey held in the JFK building in Boston last week, and it was on abortion. And the one thing that Senator Warren continued to say is, we need to remind everybody in Massachusetts that we are not safe. And what we need to do is to continue pushing past and pushing to be that beacon on the hill. So when every other states where we can't vote, and very honestly, we look like carpetbaggers if we go in too much, right? What can we do here? We can be the model. We can be the example that says, all right, if you're going to try and federally ban abortion, we are a sanctuary commonwealth. And you can come here, and the ACLU's worked on those issues. If you are having, if we have red states using their National Guard to try and round up immigrants, come to Massachusetts. This is not to expand us beyond what we're doing, but what we want to do is create a commonwealth that can lead, that can be here for the most in need, and also help get through this. You know, ACLU has been around for over 100 years. We didn't have social media, we didn't have TV, but there have been really crappy elected officials before the last couple decades, and we survived. The democracy survived. And it's so great to see you all here on a Friday night, and I just want to give the hope that we can do this together, that you guys have great, like the partners that we have here in Massachusetts, as far as like nonprofit organizations and what we want to do, it's phenomenal. So let's build the beacon, and then we can lead the way for the rest of the country, and we can make sure that we are living our ideals that the rest of the world think we actually have. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for your incredible patience and attention. It's a warm night in here, and if there were some fans blowing, I think we'd all be a little bit more comfortable. Whitney, you're a dynamite lady. Thank you so much. Last but hardly least, had just arrived from North Carolina 2 minutes ago. Her plane was delayed. She got there. She got a cab out here or an Uber out here. Is Virginia K. Solomon, who was the president of League of Women Voters nationally and is now the president, CEO of Common Cause. Virginia has been an activist from the time she was very young. She has cared deeply about getting the rights of those people who are often ignored paid attention to. This is a woman of principle, a woman of deep values, and it is a privilege. She's just come from North Carolina on a plane, so let's give her a warm welcome.
Good evening, everyone. If I am low energy, I have been traveling across the country, but I will tell you, my friends Nancy Bucas and Diane said, can you do this? And so one thing I will always tell anybody is when Nancy Bucas asks me for anything, I will say yes. So I'm really glad to be here. Yeah, cheer, yay Nancy, we love Nancy. And happy to be here again as the former CEO of the League of Women Voters, but I'm still a League member, and I'll be a League member for life, and also the new president and CEO of Common Cause. And I'm here with my colleague, Dev and Jeff from Common Cause, Massachusetts. I was asked to talk about the state of democracy by Diane and how we sustain it. But I'm going to go a little off script for you tonight because I think it's more than sustaining democracy in this moment. And I'm going to tell a little story some of you have heard me share before, but the reason I care so much about this moment, my mom is from Puerto Rico and she is a brown woman. My dad is Irish. Great combination, by the way. When I went to vote for the first time for president, my mom was so excited because in Puerto Rico, you don't have the ability to vote for president. It's a territory. And so she took me, and it was a rite of passage because for her, voting was just about not just her vote, it was for every single person on the island who didn't have the chance. And so this was something she was so excited about. She is a super voter, has always been a super voter. And we got up there and I went to go, sign in and check in. And then I go and my mother's at another table and I see she's having a hard time. And I realized her English wasn't perfect, but it was good. And I went to see what was going on and she was being asked for proof of residence. And me being a young woman at the time, and this is in the early 90s, I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew it was wrong. And it was also the first time that I realized that my mother was navigating the world much differently than I was. And I share that story because for me, it was my entry point into democracy. But it wasn't the best one. And it was also that moment when I realized that my mom was not the only person, that there are many people across this country who have those experiences. And so for me, right now in this moment, when I think about democracy, I don't think about preserving a democracy that exists. I want a new one. But I've also, and I'll get back to that in a moment, but lately when I've been thinking about democracy, what I've struggled with in this moment, with everything that's going on, and I'm sure you all do too, is how will we know when we've lost it? I ask myself that question all the time. How will we know when we've crossed that line, when it's gone too far? And if you hear stories from people who lived in Nazi Germany leading up to World War II, oftentimes they said they didn't know what was going on because what was happening in the camps was happening far away. They knew things were not right, but not everybody knew exactly what was going on, or they didn't want to acknowledge it, or they were afraid of it, so they wanted to mind their business. And then all of a sudden they were there. And so I've been thinking about these things, and I wonder, and I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you don't have to answer, but these are the questions that I've also been asking myself. Do we know we've gone too far when there's an insurrection at our Capitol? Is it too far? And I'm going to put my readers on. I'm sorry. I'm at the age now where I can't always even see my own handwriting. When news and journalism is no longer here, and it's replaced with punditry and opinion. Have we lost it when women lose their right to their own bodies? What does it mean when books are restricted and we're not able to teach history in its true form? Is that when we've lost it? Or when elected leaders, like a mayor in Alabama, is refused to be seated by the white mayor who was there before him? And this is happening right now in Alabama. There is a lawsuit. A black man won mayor of his town, and the white man who was in that seat is refusing to give it up, as well as the whole white city council. This is real, and this is America today. And you get it, right? So the questions that we grapple with is, when do you know that you've crossed that line? And how comfortable are we looking away? And I think that's left to people much smarter than I to determine when we've actually crossed that line. But I know that if we're not there yet, we're very, very close. And in the activist space, there's a chant that we do. Many of you probably have heard it before. It says, show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. And this is what democracy looks like. But what is it? What is democracy? Because I've also found in my travels and speaking with people, and especially people who are on the other side of the ideological spectrum from where I sit, that we don't have a shared definition. I can't tell you how many arguments I've been in with people who try to talk me down and say, we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic. Have you all heard that before? And they're right, we do. We live in a democratic republic. But it's still a democratic form of government. So when we think about what's possible for democracy, for me, that means that we have to develop a shared idea and understanding, a shared definition of what democracy actually is in this country. And so for me, when I think about solutions, one of the things that we have to do, we have to be able to get to that understanding of what democracy really is. And for me, it means we have to radically reimagine what democracy looks like. And for me, that has always been about a democracy for the people, by the people, all the people. And that includes youth, young people, people of color, low wealth earning people, women, LGBTQ, Native Americans, all of us in this organization. And in many ways, we also have to remove the elitism from democracy. Because just as what my mother faced when she went to go vote that time, she didn't look the part. She didn't speak the part of what somebody who is an American should look or sound like. So when I think about what's possible with democracy, for me, I think it's all of us in this together, thinking about a multiracial, multicultural, multilingual, multigenerational country that has a shared values and vision for what is possible, where everybody has the opportunity to get ahead. Everybody has access to clean water and the environment and a good education and decent wages so that you can earn a living, and so many other things, and freedom to go to church and have your religion or not if you choose not to. So for me, when I think about what's possible with democracy, I think it's a moment right now where we have an opportunity to think about what that looks like and create that together. And I know it sounds idealistic, but I am a hopeful person by nature. And I also believe, when I think about all of the big movements that have happened in the past, whether it's the civil rights movement, a woman's right to vote, whether it was the fight for the 19th Amendment, there was like a slow period, and then you got to a point, and everything blew up, and it was terrible. And then things started to change. And so in this moment where it feels terrible, the question is, what are we going to do to make that change? And so for me, I think once we think about what's possible, we go through these changes. And I'm not going to lie to you. There's a woman by the name of Rachel Kleinfeld. She works for the Carnegie Endowment, and she is an expert on political conflict. And I sit on the National Task Force on Elections Crisis with a group called Protect Democracy, and we do these scenario planning. Brilliant people from all across, Republican, Democrat, independents, former military officials, academics, I mean, just most brilliant people. I really don't know how I even got there sometimes. And we do these scenario plannings on what could happen, and we did this back in 2019 leading up into the 2020 election, and we actually predicted through one of our scenarios that January 6th would happen. And the whole point of these exercises is to think about how we could respond collectively in the civil society spaces and work with media, work with government, work with other officials to be able to address these challenges when they arise. And so Rachel was giving an update about the post-election period that will be coming as we go into November. And her topic was around political violence. And the reality is, and this is not meant to scare anybody, but there's a great likelihood that there will be some kind of political violence. Now, will it be a January 6th style attack? Most likely not. It will be more dispersed, more distributed. But it may happen. And America will get through it. We will get through it. But the way that we get through it is by combating mis and disinformation, by stopping the spread of malinformation, by civic engagement, by civic education, by engaging with our elected officials, by going out and becoming an election worker and making sure that our elections function properly. It's by showing up in your everyday lives and having those kitchen table conversations, and even having the conversations with the people that you don't want to invite to Thanksgiving dinner because they might just be that uncle who likes somebody who's orange, right? But we have to have those conversations to engage in civil discourse because we set the example. But when that time comes, if it ever comes, and I pray it doesn't, but it may, how are we going to respond? How are we going to talk about not going back to some sense of normalcy. Normalcy, for what it used to be, is gone. That's a romanticized version of an America that no longer exists. But imagine a world where we fight like hell. Can I say that in the church? I don't know. For our country in different ways. Redefining what it means to be patriotic. It's those small actions, those little things that we do on a daily basis that matter. I also have been thinking a lot about just, because it sounds easy, right? It sounds like very frou-frou when you talk about, oh, it's just these random acts of kindness. Well, it's not just that. It's also showing up for organizations like the ACLU, like the League of Women Voters, like Common Cause, finding your political home, and for me, that's a nonpartisan political home, and being a part of this movement for democracy. It's about making sure that you show up to vote. It's helping other people register to vote. It's giving people rides to the polls. And I think I heard there's like an abysmal voting rate. Is that what I was hearing from you when I walked in after a very delayed plane? But I think we also, again, have to have the opportunity and ability, give ourselves that, to be innovative. I think one of the challenges that I see today is there's a saying, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you got. We keep doing the same things over, and we don't allow ourselves to be innovative. We don't allow ourselves to dream about what's possible. And so for me, when I think about the people who are my opposition in this work, who see a different country ahead of us, who want to see a different country, they don't lack innovation. I will give them credit for it. Project 2025 is a very innovative document. If you have not heard of Project 2025, it is a document that the Heritage Foundation has put out for the next Republican administration, and it includes things like dismantling the Department of Education, abolishing the Department of Justice, just a few things like that, right? We have to be as innovative about what democracy can be. And you can do that locally. The most important role you can play in democracy for me is locally, in your home, in your town, what you can do, how are you engaged, are you on your town council, are you showing up for the meetings, are you paying attention to who's coming to the library? Because I will tell you, Moms for Liberty, in just 1 year recruited 100,000 members, 20,000 of those ran for office and are sitting now on school boards and on libraries, and they're going to meetings and they're monitoring. So we talk about, oh, these horrible people, they're taking away our books. What are we doing to stop them? Are we sitting down at the end of the day and saying, you know what, I'm going to turn on the Wheel of Fortune? Or are we going to that town council meeting? These are the choices that we have. And I think the other thing that we can do, because there's a real challenge right now, and probably a big part of the root of the challenges that we have right now, are because of dark money in politics. I care passionately about money in politics because it connects to everything else. The same people who fund the Federalist Society, who have gotten far-right extremist judges on our court, are the same people who are fighting to make sure that women cannot have access to birth control and do not have access to reproductive health care. These are the same people who are fighting to ban books. These are the same people who are deregulating environmental laws that are allowing climate change to keep going further and further. How are we using our resources? How are we being financial activists in this moment to fund campaigns, to support local civic groups, to make sure that they can do the good work as well? So I think about all these things, and I think that's the innovation that we need, coming together, doing the things. And we can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can walk and you can go and watch Wheel of Fortune on Tuesday night, and Thursday night show up for your town hall meeting. You're not going to miss anything. The letter S is always there. And when I think about the other things that we can do, and some of the things that are troubling me right now, and this is not meant to be a doom and gloom, But the decline of not only the issues with money and politics, but government ethics and accountability. And it ties to, right? There was just a report that came out that said over the past decade or whatever, Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court justices raked in about $29 million, and about 24 of that was just Clarence Thomas alone. Now, he is voted on like a piece of legislation, so it is not a partisan statement to say that. When I see things like him getting these exorbitant gifts, that is a problem. So how are we fighting against that? That accountability? Are we calling our legislators? Are we holding them to account? Are we blowing up their phone lines and saying, this is unacceptable, you need to have ethics hearings, you need to put a code of conduct in for the Supreme Court and hold them accountable? Yes, are we asking them to impeach? I think they forget who they work for. And sometimes we do too. Imagine if we're blowing up the phone lines time and time again. When I was at the League of Women Voters and we were fighting to get rid of the filibuster, we had gotten a piece of legislation that we were so close on the Freedom to Vote Act, almost over the finish line, but there was this little filibuster back in 2021. And President Biden had said at the time, and I know I'm probably over time, but he had said, I will never change my mind about a filibuster. You know, it's an important rule. We need to hold on to this rule. And I said, okay, let's see. We went every 2 weeks for 4 months, getting arrested, having rallies in front of the White House, asking President Biden to change his mind about the filibuster and to get his senators in line. And you know what? While Manchin and Sinema did not vote to overrule the filibuster and change the rules, but we got a sitting president to change his mind. He was so sick and tired of us being out there getting arrested. We even had nuns getting arrested, which was the worst for him as a Catholic, you can imagine. He changed his mind. We can do the hard things when we hold our elected officials accountable. We like to call it at Common Cause spanking and thanking. We can thank our elected officials when they do the things that we want them to do, but we also have the right to criticize them when they don't and hold them accountable. So when it comes to money in politics, when it comes to voting on legislation, when it comes to voting rights, when it comes to the things that matter to us, being able to put that pressure on them is critical and important in this moment. So when I think about a radically reimagined democracy, it's not some person, I was just down at Duke, right? It's not the Sanford Institute at Duke or the Kennedy School at Harvard who's going to figure this out. It's us. Nobody's coming to save us. Guess what? We're a democracy. And that's a good thing because it reminds us, I think about being here in this historic town of Concord during the Revolutionary War. This is such a critical town. This is the seat of where our country was born. Now, whether it was born in the way that we would have liked it, and we know there are all kinds of flaws, but this is the seat of democracy. What are you going to do to uphold that legacy? And so that is my challenge for you today. I ask you, when you walk away from here tonight, and it's warm, and I'm sorry, I see you fanning yourself, I am too. How are we going to say, in this moment, we actually helped to hold the line and actually create something better? And so I just want to thank you all today because I think that it takes a lot of courage to hold ourselves accountable, to look in the mirror and say, what can I do? Because it's so easy to turn on the TV and think of all the horrible things that are happening in the world. But democracy starts at home. And so for you to be here tonight, to be able to think about what democracy can look like and go home with an action plan. So I'm going to ask everybody really quickly to raise your hand if you're going to vote this fall. I will call you out if you don't. But then think about one or two things that you're going to do to preserve democracy here in Concord, here in the state of Massachusetts, and how that's going to impact what happens in the rest of this country in years to come. So thank you.
We couldn't be more fortunate than to have these folks here. Maria Ressa, the editor of The Rappler and winner of the Nobel Prize for Peace, gave the graduation address, as you probably all know, to the spring's Harvard College graduation. She implored each graduate to do three things, which I hope we can consider this evening, along with the challenges that you all have presented. We are at a turning point in this country, and her advice, I think, is wise. First, be your best self, which requires that we admit our strengths, our weaknesses, and our purposes. Be our best self. And don't settle for, I'm going to use your analogy, the wheel of fortune, as opposed to doing something that contributes to the ongoing progress of democracy. Number two, she said, turn crisis, and this is one, into opportunity, an action that may, by even the smallest gestures, help to preserve democracy. Just those smallest gestures, whether it's making sure that people can vote, maybe it's going out to Pittsburgh and helping out there, maybe it's going to Worcester and helping there. And lastly, and this was the one that surprised me, be vulnerable. Put ego aside. Fight for a country that cares about all people's needs, perhaps it can be best supported by admitting our own personal limitations, while simultaneously acknowledging our sense of courage and urgency. In other words, do this action without hubris, but with humility, understanding that the challenges ahead will require our vulnerability, our openness, and our embrace and engagement. I hope all of you, if you have questions for our speakers, can stay and ask them. Come right up here and do so. And thank you all so much for coming tonight. It is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you.